This is a Neanderthal, not a missing link, not an ancestor we improved upon, a different kind of human being, with a brain as large as yours, slightly larger, in fact. They made tools, they made fire, they made glue, 40,000 years before anyone else thought to. They painted caves in Spain 20,000 years before our species arrived to see them. They wore feathers. They collected eagle talons. They buried their dead. And they did all of it in a world that was trying every single day to kill them. 300,000 years. Say that again, slowly. 300,000 years. Our own species has existed for roughly 300,000. Civilization, cities, writing, agriculture, empires, everything you have ever read about fits inside the last 12,000. They lasted the whole way. Through ice ages, through droughts, through eruptions that turned the sky to ash. They did not survive because they were lucky. They survived because they were, by any honest measure, extraordinary. So this film is not going to ask why they failed. They didn't fail. This film is going to ask something harder. What was it like to be them? To wake in the dark? To be cold for 8 months of every year? To love people you would probably outlive? To teach a child something you would never see them use? We are going to follow one family, one valley, one father. He never existed, and every single thing he does in the next 20 minutes happened to someone, somewhere. We just don't know their name. So we will call him Corvin. This is The Ones Who Stayed. Somewhere that will one day be called Europe. There are no borders, no roads, no names for anything beyond what you can walk to. The valley is maybe 30 kilometers end to end. For the 11 people who live in it, it is the entire world. They do not live in a cave, not the way you are imagining. They live under an overhang of rock, stone above, fire below, hides stretched across the wind side. It is warm. It is dry. It is not primitive. It is exactly as much shelter as this place requires. Corvin is 38 years old. In his world, that makes him old. His hands have been broken and reset by nothing but time. His ribs were cracked 11 winters ago. They healed crooked. He feels them when the cold comes down from the north. He does not complain about it. There is no one to complain to who has not got worse. Beside him, Ina. She is the reason this family eats in February. She knows which roots are food and which are death. She knows which bark stops a fever. She knows where the birds nested last spring, and the spring before that, and the one before that. We used to call this gathering, as if it were something easy. It is a library, held in one person's head, written down nowhere. And there is a boy, 7 summers, maybe 8, nobody is counting. His name for us is Rock. This is the part of the story the museums never built a diorama for. Corvin is making a blade. Watch his hands. He is not smashing rocks together. He has chosen this stone from a place 4 days' walk from here. He has shaped the core first, a domed shell prepared with dozens of small strikes, so that when the final blow lands, a single flake comes away with an edge already perfect. Archaeologists call this the Levallois technique. It means he is holding the finished tool in his mind before it exists. It takes years to learn. It cannot be discovered by accident. It has to be taught, which means somebody taught him, which means somebody taught them, which means this knowledge has been passed hand to hand, father to son, mother to daughter, for longer than our species has existed. He does not explain it. There may not be words for it. He shows it, again and again. And the boy gets it wrong, and again. And the boy gets it wrong. And Corvin does not take the stone away. Patience is not a modern invention. By the fire, Ina is heating birch bark, slowly, without air. Too hot, it burns. Too cool, nothing happens. In between, a black tar that will hold stone to wood harder than anything else on this continent. We did not manage this ourselves for another 40,000 years. Autumn. The grass has gone the color of old bone, and the valley has filled with something enormous. Steppe bison, 2 meters at the shoulder, 900 kilograms. Horns that can open a man from hip to collarbone. This is not prey. This is a decision. 5 hunters leave before light. Corvin, 4 others. They carry spears with stone points bound in birch tar and sinew. Heavy shafts, thick, not designed to be thrown. And that is the whole story of their bodies. Look at the difference. His chest is deeper. His shoulders are wider. His arms are shorter and thicker. His legs are built for power, not distance. Bone for bone, he is stronger than any human alive today. Not strong for his time, stronger, full stop. A Neanderthal forearm could generate force that would tear a modern athlete's tendons from the bone. And here is why that matters. Because a body like that only makes sense if you plan to fight something enormous, at arm's length. They do not shoot from a distance. They do not run the herd for a day until it collapses. They walk up to 900 kilograms of animal, and they push the spear in. There is no formation. There is no signal. There is a lifetime of hunting together and knowing what the man beside you will do before he does it. It lasts under a minute. The animal is down, and so is one of them. His forearm is broken, cleanly, if he is lucky. Corvin is beside him before the noise has stopped. We know this moment happened, constantly. When researchers cataloged Neanderthal skeletons, they found a pattern of injuries that confused them for decades. Head, neck, shoulders, arms, very few in the legs. The same distribution found in one modern profession, rodeo riders. Men and women who spend their working lives in physical contact with animals that outweigh them 10 to 1. Nearly every adult Neanderthal we have ever found was injured at least once, badly enough to be out of action. And here is the detail that changed everything. The bones healed, which means somebody carried him home. Somebody brought him water. Somebody gave him meat he did not hunt for weeks, maybe months. In a world with no surplus, in a world where every mouth costs somebody else a meal, you do not do that for a stranger. You do not do that for a resource. You do that for family. Strength is what got them to the animal. It is not what got them home. Winter, the real one. The river stops making sound. The bison are gone. The days are 4 hours long, and and the nights are a test. This is the season that decides whether a family exists next year. Inside the shelter, there's an old man. He cannot hunt. He has not hunted in years. His right arm ends above the elbow. He is deaf or close to it. He is, by every cold calculation, a cost. And he is still here. This is not invention. In a cave in northern Iraq, we found him. Shanidar I, a man who lived roughly 45 years, ancient for a Neanderthal. A crushing blow to the left side of his face had blinded him. His right arm was withered from childhood and amputated above the elbow. He had a damaged leg, severe arthritis. Hearing loss so profound he could not have heard a predator approaching. Every one of those injuries had healed. Every one. He lived for years like that, in an ice age, which means for years, every single day, somebody chose him. Somebody fed a man who could not feed himself. Somebody walked slower so he could keep up. There is no ceremony in it, no speech. She simply hands him food the way you would hand it to your father, because that is who he is. And then, one night, the breathing in the corner stops. They do not leave him where he fell. They do not push him out into the snow for the wolves. In frozen ground, with stone and antler in hands, they dig. Why? A body does not need to be buried. It costs calories. It costs time. It costs warmth they cannot spare. There is no survival advantage to a grave. We have found their burials across Europe and the Middle East, bodies placed deliberately, curled as if sleeping, sometimes with tools, sometimes with the bones of animals. At Shanidar, one body lay in soil dense with the pollen of flowering plants. We argue, still, about what that means. But strip away the argument, and one fact remains standing. They did not walk away from their dead, which means they understood that someone was gone, which means they understood the difference between a person and a body, which means somewhere in that shelter, in that winter, 100,000 years before the first temple, the first prayer, the first written word, somebody felt the thing we feel. About 40,000 years ago, the last of these people stopped walking this earth. There is no hidden valley where they survived. Every claim has been tested. Every story has faded. It ended, quietly, like footsteps disappearing beneath fresh snow. Different countries, different faces, different lives. We often ask, what happened to them? That question has the wrong answer built into it, because they never completely left. If your family comes from Europe, Asia, Australia, or the Americas, around 2% of your DNA came from them. If your family comes from Africa, you still carry a trace. Not stories, not legends. Instructions, written inside living cells. Pieces of another human story, still working inside yours. They survived for more than 300,000 years. Long enough for another kind of human to arrive. Long enough to meet us. And when our two worlds crossed, they left us something far greater than tools, or bones, or stories. They left us a part of themselves. Not hunting, not fighting, not carrying a spear, just sitting outside the shelter at sunrise, watching his children play. He smiles, only once, a small smile, the same smile any father might have worn. He looks directly into the lens. If this story gave you a new perspective on our past, leave a like and subscribe to Avinash Decodes for more deep journeys into who we are. Thank you for watching.